So welcome to this conversation, Rajiv. It's really nice to have you here today. And what I'd like to do is begin by asking you to identify a particular turning point in your life that changed the way you thought about your life or the way you decided to do things.
Sure. Thanks, Rohini. Thanks for having me here. I would say one of the biggest turning points in my life came about when I was on a roller coaster ride in my corporate career. And I did a count of it. I think at one point in time in the previous 15 years of my working, I had gone through 11 designations and, career moves. And, it was the typical uh, alpha type personality running after corporate goals and all of that. And at the same time, my kids were growing up, and uh, even in my like early childhood, I used to love playing with my younger siblings and cousins, and I just loved the feeling of being around children, and that continues till date, of course. And at that point in time, somewhere in those years when I was traveling and literally living out of a suitcase, somebody just said this to me while making a career switch. And he said that I don't want to see my kids growing horizontally. I want to see them growing vertically. And it was a simple statement, but a very profound one. And till date, of course, it has stuck with me. And that decided what I wanted to do in life going forward. I don't want to be, away from the family and especially the kids while they were growing up and, miss their golden years. So that was the motivation which prompted me to move from a consulting job which I was doing in Accenture at that point in time, uh, to WNS, where I was supposed to be working with the CEO's office in the strategy department. And that obviously did not involve much traveling. As luck would have it, they very soon figured out. And that time I had only one kid, and he was fairly young, just a couple of years old. And then WNS figured out that, yeah, this guy is good in front of the client. And they started shunting me all over the world to make client pitches and all of that. And then the second one came along, and again I started thinking, this is not what I set out to do. I had switched jobs so that I could travel less, and had on purpose figured out something which fitted exactly the requirements, but life had other plans for me. So I did that again for a few years, and by the time my kids were 3 and 6 years old, I said enough is enough, and then I moved to something else which did not require me to travel. So that was the job as the CEO of India's leading intellectual property rights firm. And yeah, because it's a law firm and it doesn't have that sort of a sales culture, obviously it was much better suited. So that was the turning point, to cut a long story short, in my life. And it, of course, led to a lot of dramatic things, uh, which, of course, we can talk about more in detail.
Sure. So just recapping on that statement that your friend or your acquaintance made. So what did he say? Can you just repeat that again? What did he say?
So
He didn't want his children to grow up
So
horizontal.
yeah, so what he said was, and he was making a career switch to an in-house role in a corporate. And while leaving consulting, he said this to me, that I don't want to see my kids growing horizontally, which means that when he's home, all he sees is the kids growing taller and taller, lying on the bed because he's not at home while they're awake. Typically, we would take early morning flights and that kind of stuff,
I see.
right? So I don't want to see my kids growing horizontally. I want to see my kids growing vertically, which means, I want to be around them as they are growing,
When they're awake and not
when
just
they are
when
awake.
you're playing.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
see.
So
Okay.
in consulting, we had this,
Yeah.
two by two sort of thing. So we always used to think on two dimensions.
Yeah.
So that was, thinking on the horizontal dimension and the vertical dimension.
I see that yeah, that makes a bit more sense because I was thinking about a graph chart and thinking I don't understand what he means by that.
Yeah.
so so obviously your job, because it involved so much travel, that was one of the reasons why you were away from your children. Um, do you feel it's more about being away from home that was contributing to you feeling you were missing out, or was it the nature of your job that perhaps involved you thinking about your job even when you were with your family?
No, it wasn't so much the latter. I loved my job. I loved what I was doing at that time. I still love consulting and the ability to help people and to advise people who who need my help or expertise, or anybody else's expertise for that matter. It was really more the case of missing out on the precious childhood years of my kids. So that was the main trigger point, because I always looked forward to having kids of my own, even as I was in my early 20s and stuff. And everybody around me socially also would say that, yeah, Rajiv is one guy who really loves kids, and I used to be the unofficial babysitter of friends and family. So so that was really the driving point. So
Sure.
I didn't feel it was right to go through life and miss those golden years, because pretty much everybody I met said that this time is never going to come back.
Yeah. And so actually you mentioned that you'd been doing that sort of slightly high octane corporate job for nearly 15 years. Is that right? You'd been traveling before you made that switch.
Yes, so
Yeah.
that was before I finally made the switch. Previous attempt, of course, resulted in was infructuous,
Yeah.
because the job morphed into a traveling job very, very quickly.
Yeah.
In fact, when my wife was expecting our second one, uh, the company made me do a project in the Bay Area. So I was in Silicon Valley for 4 months while my wife was carrying the second one, and I said, I am not going. No, no chance, no way. This is not why I took this up. So the company footed in an absolutely unprecedented move. I hope nobody is listening from my peer group, because they'll make an issue out of it in terms of a policy. But they made an unprecedented move. They bore the expenses of me and my wife and my son traveling and stay and accommodation and everything else in the States for the period of those 4 months, all included, just to get me on board and get to that project, because as they always say, the company's fate depends on this project, and the project depends on you, and all that fancy stuff that they say to people to make them do things that they don't want to do.
Do you know, I love this thing that you've just sparked in me, because I'm working on a book about what men want and what men think and feel, and you've just reminded me of some of the recurring themes that were coming up in the conversations I've had for this book, where men feel, I mean, obviously there's so much focus on women's rights and
Right.
women getting more equal opportunities, but men often feel that they don't get the opportunity to be the kind of dad they want to be, because
Yeah.
they don't get the same amount of parental leave or, paternity leave or, the kind of concessions that your employer made. And although it may seem like a cost, but actually from the employer's point of view, it makes perfect sense, because otherwise they might lose you,
Oh,
because
yes.
you,
And
yeah,
the other thing, Rohini, sorry to interrupt you, but the other thing about society is that, you're not considered, to use the phrase, you're not considered man enough if you say that you've got domestic duties, or if you want to spend time with the kids, or, attend to maybe your wife who's expecting. So, or even at other stages in life, why just single out childhood and parenting, but even at other stages of life. So somehow we have this concept and notion in society uh, that it's the woman's job and it's not the man's job, and I don't think that is true, because the times have truly changed, and the structure of the society and the nuclear households is just not what it used to be earlier.
yeah.
So I think it's a time to question all our long held beliefs, which we just seem to carry on from one generation to another without really examining, is it consistent with the reality and the structure and the fabric of the society that we live in.
Yes, and especially as more women are working now,
Yeah, absolutely.
if companies don't have those kind of rights for men and women, then there's automatically going to be discrimination, because the woman may feel that it's her role to be the carer and the sort of person who's around. And that will automatically then mean that she won't get the role that you might, because you're willing to make that sacrifice. So it's an interesting
Right.
point. So when they did that for you, did that in any way pave the way for them to do similar things for other male colleagues?
Not in a very structured sort of way, because this was obviously at a huge cost. I think, the project profitability kind of nosedived with this sort of an expenditure, right? So certainly this was not something that they would do on a recurring basis for other people or stuff like that. But they did introduce paternity leave. Yeah, so that was put into place. I'm talking about maybe, around 12, 13 years ago or something like that. So at that point in time, paternity leave was not a very common thing, at least in India.
Sure, sure.
So there were some progressive actions, but I don't think that it has resulted in an across the board sort of rethink in terms of, treating fatherhood or men differently.
And do you think that's partly because the men haven't really even considered asking for things? Because very often that's the problem, that if you don't ask, you don't get.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And honestly, I don't think everybody has that sort of desire as well.
Sure.
Not everybody, looks forward to, fatherhood as much as probably I was looking forward to. We are all cut out differently.
Yeah. So I want to talk about that a bit more in a minute, but I just want to segue into where we are today with the pandemic, where remote working has become, the norm. And perhaps, 18 months ago, no one would have imagined doing a sales pitch without traveling, even if it was to the other side of the world, right? What do you think has changed from, your conversations with people? Do you think that that whole way of working is going to change in any permanent way, or is this just a pandemic driven remote working solution?
No, there are definitely permanent changes that have happened already. I think 18 months, and it's not gone away. I think, if you look at the cases right now in India, they are at an all-time high. The the number of cases happening daily is 2 to 3 times the earlier peak. So there's a very funny meme on the internet which says comparing, the number of COVID cases with the fear of COVID. So 1 year ago, the number of cases was low, but the fear was at its peak. Today, the number of cases are at its peak, but the fear is probably at the lowest, right? So permanent changes have definitely happened in terms of the mindset, I would say. So earlier there was a bit of a stigma in terms of stigma and mistrust. So stigma from the society's perspective and mistrust from the employer's perspective about people working from home. I think both these things have pretty much gone away.
Mm,
Not so much the mistrust, but definitely the stigma has gone away because it is considered a done thing now to work from home from a societal perspective.
yeah.
As far as the mistrust is concerned, I would say it's kind of 50-50 right now. There are people, who have adapted to the new way of working, and they know that, you cannot be monitoring people in physical workspaces. So a lot of them are trying to ape the same, monitoring and control mechanisms on the internet, through remote monitoring devices, etc.
Mm,
But honestly, I don't feel that's going to get them very far in life because you are not controlling machines; you are controlling human beings who have emotions, who go through ups and downs, who are finding it extremely challenging to adjust to this new way of life. So if you treat them like a productivity tool or a machine, I don't think you're going to get the best out of them. No, I mean, no chance.
yeah, yeah. And I want to talk a little bit about your childhood, Rajiv. I mean, your passion for, being there for your children, watching them grow. And I mean, some of the things that your children who are they teenagers, both of them?
Yeah, they are 17 and 14 now. Yeah.
So, I mean, we're going to talk about some of the things that they're getting up to, which is quite impressive. But I want to just maybe go back to your childhood. Tell me what that was like.
So, a few things, if I look at, what I have been doing in the recent years, I can easily trace them back to my childhood, for example. So, one of the things that I used to do in childhood, which I'm very proud of, I even wrote it in my CV, and, a few people made fun of me behind my back, and, some of them in front of me on my face. But I still am proud of the fact that from standard seven, pretty much in the entire middle school and senior school, which is from standard 7th to standard 12th in our time. 6 years consecutively, I did not miss a single day of school. So I had 100% attendance for 6 straight years, right? And at that time, it didn't mean anything much except, walking up and getting a certificate from the school principal. So, that was like a big moment. But I think in life, it has manifested itself in very different ways. Because if you show up every day and if you are consistent in whatever you're doing, ultimately it leads to results. There's a theory that if you just improve 1% every day, you will become a multi-bagger in a year's time itself. Why even talk about long term? So that kind of trait has stayed with me over all these years. I think the other thing which I used to do in childhood was kind of crack the system. So, rather than sitting and studying for long hours, because I was more interested in, playing and fooling around and, all of that. So I used to kind of crack the system, look at, the last year's question papers and patterns and, look at 10, 20 years patterns, try and get into the mindset of the examiner and the question setter. What is it that they are thinking? If this is the pattern that they have been following for the last 10 or 15 years, what is it that they are going to be doing in my time? And hence optimize my effort so that I had to study the least and still sail through with flying colors. And I was pretty good at that. So I cracked the system right through through my schooling, and I never ever intended to be the topper. So I was in the top 10%, so that was good enough for me. So that's how I sailed through in my entire schooling. I sailed through, my chartered accountancy. I, cracked CAT, which is the admission entrance exam into the IIMs. I got into IIMs. And what happened thereafter was, a completely different ball game. So that is another story in itself. But this is what I kept doing through my childhood, cracking the system. And in terms of how it relates to what I do currently, of course, analytics and AI and ML, these are big things. And they are all, predictive and intelligence tools, essentially helping us foretell the future. So I use some of that mindset and thought processes and apply it to AI, ML, and these predictive and the intelligence stack technologies to figure out what the future is going to be. Because in my mind, I always feel like, I have to crack the system and predict the next move.
Yeah. So that sounds like a really for someone as young as you probably were, how on earth did you manage to get hold of, you know, papers going back 15, 20 years? That sounds like superly creative, of you. How did
Yeah,
you do that?
so I mean, you just keep asking people, and a few of them would have because there was no internet, there was no structured mechanism. So you would just ask around, and people would pass these things through the years.
I see.
So yeah, some of us did have access to that. At higher ed levels, then things became more structured because these things were published. So you could just buy them off the shelf. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was your intention really to get the most out of, so it's the productivity thing, for the minimum effort, maximum output.
Yes.
Was that
No,
your?
I didn't. I actually didn't need the maximum output in life at that point in time because I came from a fairly privileged and well-to-do business family. So somehow in my mind I had that feeling that I was comfortable and I didn't really need to do too much in life.
Yeah.
I just had that feeling in childhood. I distinctly remember. I don't think like that at all anymore. That's a totally different issue. But that was the feeling then. So it wasn't to maximize the output or the results. It was just to get enough by spending the minimum amount of time.
I see. Okay.
So yeah, that was my algorithm in those days.
And so the connection between, doing chartered accountancy and what you do now, which is much more technology focused and artificial intelligence and machine learning. So tell me a little bit about how that, shift happened for you.
Yeah, so that is where I again come back to my story of my children. So in my years at Accenture and WNS, which are both very solid from a tech standpoint, I wasn't really doing too much of tech, although I was forced into tech projects. My first project manager in Accenture put me onto an ERP project, and I had no tech background. And he just, instilled that self-belief in me, which I never had as far as tech was concerned. He said, no, you will do it. I am confident. You just go ahead and, be yourself. So all of those things happened, but I still never had that self-confidence and belief. So here was the turning point as far as my tech journey is concerned. So I was sitting with my son, who was then, I think, in standard 5 or 6. This was about 6 years ago or thereabouts. And he said, Dad, I'm interested in programming. Can you teach me? I said, I haven't learned any of it in my education. I only did a couple of years in school, and that was like a language called BASIC, which is never really used in the real world out there. So just some basic stuff. I told him, okay, I will revise whatever I know, and I will teach you. So in the summer holidays, I taught him whatever I knew. He picked up whatever I knew from my 2 years of programming. He picked it up in a couple of weeks flat, and then he said, okay, I want to know more. And then he started, creating concepts that were, completely out of the world for me. So for instance, one of the things he said when I taught him, how to capture a mouse using some commands, which of course I learned and then taught him. He said, okay, if we can do all of this, then maybe we can create a replica of MS Paint kind of software using QBasic, which is something that I don't think anybody can even fathom. I mean, no adult will tell you that you can create a replica of MS Paint using, a QBasic programming language, right? Then, we did something with graphs and images, and he's interested in music. So we started playing around with sounds as well. All this in the most elementary and rudimentary programming language in the world. And then he started saying, okay, why do we make graphs if people who cannot see will not be able to see these graphs? Can't we convert these numbers into, audio frequencies? And can we make an audio graph which even the visually impaired can, listen into? And I was shocked. I
Wow.
said, this is my kid. And, obviously, if I am his dad, then I need to be, a chip of the old block. I mean, he's a chip of the old block. So I must have all of these things inside of me somewhere that have gotten, either forgotten or they were lying latent and hidden somewhere uh, all all these years. So that led me to really think and question, who am I, and what are my skills, and if I'm so good with numbers, then why am I not really shining on the tech front? And that's because of the educational choices I made and the self-limiting beliefs that I had developed over all these years. So it was almost like you realize that you're an elephant and your legs were tied to that little iron stub when you were a child, and you always believed that you couldn't move out of it, whereas now if you really think, you have it all within you.
Yeah.
So from there, one thing led to the other, and I picked up more advanced knowledge, and of course combined programming with analytics and algorithms, which is really what AI and ML is all about. And then I combined it with language, because that was the other passion that I had. And that led to, I mean, a whole new frontier of development, which was quite unique in those days.
So, you sound like somebody who, I mean, normally children ask questions, children are very curious, especially when they're young, and everything is like a question. And sometimes as parents, we can get a little bit tired of that. And especially when they go to school, the teachers don't want children asking too many questions. So very often that natural ability to be curious gets killed quite young. So, what were you and your wife doing differently for your young son to stay curious? Was it that you allowed that curiosity to flourish in the home? Was he in a school that encouraged it? I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, so definitely answering questions, but and encouraging curiosity rather than quelling it. But more importantly, I think we participated along with the children in terms of whatever they were asking. So it isn't as if we are giving the answers or asking them to Google the answers. Uh, we said, okay, if there is something we don't know, or if there is something that we can do, then it will be so much more interesting. So we, our style of parenting was more getting the kids to do something. And in the process, we picked a lot of these sort of skills ourselves. So, programming was one, and, then that was followed by robotics, because When I asked my son, what do you want to do when you grow up? And this time, he was like maybe a 12-year-old or something. And he said, I want to do something which combines programming with, the mechanical aspects. I said, mechanical is not a word which I would expect a 12-year-old to know. And I told him, this sounds like robotics. And he said, okay, what is robotics all about? And then I explained it to him. He got interested. So we put him into robotics class, and I also learned, a little bit of, kiddie robotics along with him. Took, some Arduino and Raspberry Pi chips and did some do-it-yourself kind of projects with him. So it's not just telling them or, guiding them or answering their questions. It's also about being engaged in it along with them. Because what we don't realize a lot of times as parents is that children don't listen to us as much and learn from us as much as they see what we are doing and how we are spending our time, right? So if you're doing something along with them, then I think that makes all the difference.
I love that. Gosh, I wish we'd had this conversation when my children were younger. I could have been a different kind of parent to my children. So that's about your son. Now, tell us a bit about your daughter. What was her curiosity?
So she's, my son, if he's the quintessential left-brained, my daughter's the quintessential, right-brained, and I am not the one, who's kind of got the fine art sort of talent in me. But I do consider myself sufficiently right-brained enough in terms of creativity and, the higher order right-brain stuff. So when she was growing up, one of the things that I do remember distinctly is we had a lot of conversation about writing, and she was interested in reading and writing. And I think somewhere around the age of 5, she was between 5 and 6 years old. She looked at me, writing articles, and I used to enjoy it, and I would, show it to her. She said that, even I want to start a blog, and she started one when she was that young. Today, of course, she will kill me if I, let out the name of a blog in public, because yeah, that's not her anymore. Her writing has evolved significantly since then. But having those discussions with her about various aspects was completely life changing. To give you an example, one of the things she wrote about when she was around that age, maybe 8 years, 7 years old or so, uh, I asked her one day, what is going on? So she said, there are projects in school and this and that. I said, what are the challenges? Yeah, others don't work. I have to do all the work myself. And the conversation went on. And I realized that, this is like a mini MBA session going on. And out of all the things that we spoke about, I said, why don't you compile a 10-part series on, managing teams and about management, just from the
How old was
perspective
she?
of leading projects in school. And she did that. And even though those were really mini articles with, maybe a couple of hundred words or even less than that each, divided into 10 parts. But it was an amazing experience for a parent to see the child, thinking so creatively and expansively about simple things like doing projects in school.
How old was she when she did this?
I would imagine she was about maybe 7 or 8 years of age.
Oh, I love that. My goodness. But, I think it's all credit to you and your wife, because I feel that, especially in this day and age where we have so many distractions, we've got smartphones, we've got Netflix, we've got a million other things, which means that even parents who are physically present with their children are mentally not there, because
Yeah,
they're distracted by other things. And the kind of interest that you took in your children's, and without making fun of them, without making them feel like, oh, you're too young to be thinking about these things. I think that's so congratulations to you and your wife for
yeah,
bringing up
thank you.
two amazing children. So in that process of, because someone once said to me that to truly master something, you have to teach it to someone else. And so in the
Absolutely.
process of you getting involved in these activities with your children, what did you learn about yourself?
Oh, a lot of things. I think in the last 10 years, ever since I made, that career move, I've been the CEO of this firm for exactly a decade now. I think my life has completely changed. So for starters, of course, there's again, I'll divide the skills into maybe the left brain and the right brain part. Uh, so on the left brain side, of course, I've picked up a lot of technical skills, and I have that confidence in me today that I can learn anything and I can do anything. I don't think that confidence was there in me even 5, 6 years ago before I really took off on this journey, right? And that's I believe a very powerful thing to have in life, because no matter what the circumstances are, of course, the pandemic happened, and the world has been suffering in the last 15 months, but I'm completely at peace mentally, because I know, come what may, I have full confidence in myself and my family that we can sail through anything that life throws at us. So that's on on the technical side. I think from my daughter, I've learned a lot of things. Apart from, of course, we both have kind of kindled our interest for writing. So that has led me to writing a lot of things. I became an author last year. I wrote a 20-part series on Year in Review, which even today is ranking number one on Google for a couple of terms with billions of results and all of that. So that's that is the skill part. I think in terms of mindset also, I've learned a lot from her, especially because of the compassionate nature and the intuitive nature that she has. And she kind of is very perceptive. So even when she was very young, maybe again 4, 5 years of age or around that time, she could sense, who in the family is being, genuinely concerned and who's putting up an act. And, she would make it known to us that, yeah, she did understand those things. I thought that, it took me a long while in my life to really get to that level. And sometimes I feel that I'm quite, inadequate when it comes to these things. But I've picked up a lot of these things from her personality as well. And I think I'm improving drastically, at least in the last 1 year. If I look at what I've been able to do to keep people around me motivated or the team motivated, I don't think I could have done that maybe 5 or 10 years ago. So it's all because of I think the compassion and the intuitive understanding of people that she brings to the table, that I've kind of been able to look at very closely, and maybe there's a rub-off effect. As they say, child is the father of the man. So
I love
uh,
that. So in terms of your leadership skills, since your children were born, and especially the things that you learned from your daughter, tell me, maybe give us an example of a few things that you're doing differently now as a leader that maybe you weren't doing in your old, previous
so
life.
so one thing that I'm doing differently, again, this is more recent, so it's got to do with the pandemic, is allowing life and work to exist side by side. So earlier, what used to happen with at least for I'm talking about myself, that there was a straight jacketed bucket in my mind that this is work, whether it's 9 to 6 or whatever it is, and that time we are not supposed to be doing anything else or thinking about anything else. And I used to run my life like that, and I would pretty much in my mind, it was a belief system that I had that others should also adhere to and subscribe to this sort of philosophy and behavior. So this used to work well in the old normal, as they say. But I've completely changed my style in the last year and a half or thereabouts. So now it is about accepting the fact that people have a life and the people have work, and the two cannot be put in different buckets, especially when people are working out of home. So again, at work, we've put in a lot of initiatives to involve the families at work. So some of the employee engagement activities that we've been doing have involved families also, and of course, no prizes for guessing that such events have, of course, been a much bigger hit amongst our people as compared to doing employee engagement activities with just our employees, right? Because you can, it's all about empathy. If you can visualize what it is that is going on in their homes, if they are sitting in front of a laptop and doing some engagement activity related to office, and the family members are sitting next to them, they would be feeling left out, right? So, and they would be curious about what are these guys up to, why are they laughing, why are they making sounds, and all of that. So if you just kind of take an extra step and involve them, and it doesn't take too much with Zoom or other such digital tools that we have today, uh, to create more inclusive events. So we've done a lot of creative stuff on that front. So I believe that has changed, and people also see a more humane side of you. So I don't think that was the case maybe 8 to 10 years ago. I think they would only see the left brain side, the corporate executive chasing targets and treating people like productivity machines in a very crude sort of way. And I think that approach has changed, and it's quite visibly changed. It's not something that is put up as a facade, which unfortunately is what really happens in a lot of places where this is driven down, top down as a strategy which is enforced by consultants. So you're told to do something, and I think people can make out.
And without having to give me any inside information on your how your business is doing, are there any sort of trends you've noticed, this sort of more inclusive way of working, and more acceptance that work life are not two completely mutually exclusive compartments? How has that translated into productivity of your employees, in sort of maybe just workplace engagement, and also profitability and things like that?
Yeah, so lots of positive effects, I would say. In fact, moving on from that, or extending the theme that we spoke about earlier about learning and skill development, I think that's one major thing that I've tried to do during the pandemic. So what I've encouraged the team to do is pick up skills and become much more digital, and it has taken off in a way much beyond what I was expecting this would lead to. So now some of the business users in my team have become citizen developers, which means they can create apps on their own without having any background in technology. So just like I became a convert from a commerce background student to somebody who's doing cutting edge tech, these people also transformed in the last 1 year. In fact, shorter time frame than that, but in a subset of the last 1 year, to have that confidence that they can visualize what their process should look like in the digital world, and not only stop at that, but configure those processes on systems and create apps on their own, which they could use on their desktops or their mobile apps. And can you imagine how empowered a person would feel if they have the power to do this, when 12 months ago they would probably shudder to write formulas in Excel sheets or what have you. So that's on the technical or the skill side of of their developmental journey. I think the other very big factor is the mental health. So some of them have come and said to me in strict confidence, of course, that they were facing anxiety issues or mental health issues, and they feared that they would get into depression. And maybe one of the articles that I wrote in March itself, which I converted into a book, uh, I think around 31st March last year, within 10 days of the lockdown being announced. So that motivated them and made them see the positive side of things. I think it's about uh, having a constructive mindset versus having a consumer mindset. So if you have a consumer mindset, what you end up doing, especially in times like the pandemic, is consume all the negative feed, because you only have negative feed. You do not have positive news feed out there, whether it's WhatsApp or the Facebook algorithms or the mainstream media, right? So if you are a consumer, in any case, you will only be consuming negative content, because that is what sells, and that's going to stay that way forever. However, if you have a creator mindset, uh, then you can really build things on your own, and it not only does well to the business and or to whatever functional sphere that you're working in. It also has a tremendous impact on your self-confidence, on your self-belief, on your self-esteem. And as the government of India has been saying, you can become Atmanirbhar or self-reliant. And I think that's a very powerful thing, to actually be self-reliant based on the skills that you've developed. And I think in that way, the pandemic has really been a blessing of sorts for us.
So it also feels to me like the mindset you've had around parenting, and encouraging your children to be curious and to follow their curiosity and creativity, that you're using a similar thing in your workplace? And I don't want to make it seem like you're the parent to your
No,
employees.
slightly different. So I've used some tricks there also, but yeah, they are not the same as the one with kids. Although I must say this, we did a session on childhood with our office colleagues. So we did do a session where we got people to dig out their old childhood photographs and bring it up to the to a Zoom meeting. And of course, we played a game, and everybody was supposed to guess who this person was whose childhood pic was displayed. And we asked everybody to speak about their childhood. And of course, I did a bit of a wrap up session connecting, whatever they were saying to how they were in their job profile and what else they could do creatively to expand on their professional repertoire. So yeah, there was a little bit of playing the parent also, but that wasn't the main thing. The main thing was really I coined something called the pit stop metaphor. And the pit stop, of course, when expanded, translates into functional things, process information technology, strategy, training, operations, and people, and all of that. But more importantly, what I told my folks at work is that treat the pandemic, and this is like 2 months into the lockdown. I didn't know that it is going to, keep running for 15 months, or I don't know for how long.
Hmm.
But I told them to treat the pandemic as a pit stop. So just like in a Formula One race, you have a pit stop, where you take a break from the race, and here you are taking a break from the race of life, so to speak. But it is, a make or break time, because this is the time when you can really change everything. You can, change the oil, you can change the tires, you can, fine tune your engine, you can do whatever you want. And just like you do that in a space of 10 seconds in a 1 hour race in a Formula One, think of this as a 6 month. Of course, I didn't know how long it will last, but that's what I told them. Think of this as 6 months in your life of 75 years, where you're getting a golden opportunity to completely revamp your internals and get back to the race of life whenever the pandemic is over. And I think that that struck a chord with people, and they got motivated and inspired. And it was one of the enabling factors which led to a lot of the positivity and everything else that followed from there on.
Fascinating. And I'm sort of curious to know whether, I mean, I grew up in India as well. So I know that there's a slight hierarchical way of looking at things. So for example, if you're a young person, then you have to show reverence to someone who's older. Even in a workplace, if someone's, older than you, then you kind of have to go in not trying to show your knowledge, but to be very deferential to someone who. So that sort of is not how you brought up your children. You've kind of treated them as equals. You've been willing to learn from them, and it feels like you're bringing some of those principles into your workplace. But how do your children? How have you taught them to cope with a society that is not as open and welcoming of young people who know their mind, who are questioning, and who are creative and curious?
Well, so far, I don't think the kids have had a problem really, because I think the world has been quite welcoming as far as they are concerned. And maybe they've not yet reached that stage in life, and they will face those challenges. Because when you're children, everybody kind of is fond of you and pampers you, and even if you do something which is sort of imperfect, you are showered with love, adulation, praise, and all of that. And of course, we are all biased because they are part of our family and so on. I think they will, or they might face these challenges in the future. However, from a different standpoint, if I visualize them getting into, let's say, a workspace in maybe 5 years from now, or 7 years from now, I think by that time the managers, or the people who are people leaders in the workspace, will have to change their attitudes and their belief systems about how they treat freshers coming onto jobs, right? And that is not just true of 5 or 7 years down the line. I think that is very much true of today as well. So for example, if you look at a company like McKinsey, the world famous strategy consulting firm, last year they did an experiment, and they said, in this issue of their knowledge magazine, apart from having the articles from our top partners, we will have articles from our Gen Z employees who are, first year associates, right? So McKinsey, who's known for knowledge and their insights, if they have the courage to do this, knowing fully well that, their clients or, the CEOs of Fortune 500 corporations may laugh at them and, throw them out of the door, saying, I don't pay you millions of dollars to have a Gen Z telling me, how I should run my business or what they think about the world. But I think that is a telling sign that the world is changing and the attitudes are changing. So I do hope they face less of those resistances. But I think the way they are brought up, I think they'll be able to cope with these challenges.
Yeah, well, I hope so, because I think we have so much to learn from the younger generation. So I've got a few maybe final questions to wrap this conversation up. So tell me a little bit about how learning from your children and learning to, to embrace your own curiosity and creativity, how is that translated into a sort of a bigger purpose for you?
Yeah, so I think learning is just one part of it. I think the other part, which is kind of dovetailing into the purpose, is really about sharing the knowledge and the insights and the experiences that one has uh, along with others with a view to helping them. So, if you take LEA from learning and, sharing and helping, so it's kind of a leash model that I have in mind. And that has been my driving force for the last, I would say, few years, but it has become more pronounced in the last year or so post the pandemic. And especially because of the fact that, people have come back and said to me that the fact that I shared my, experiences or said something motivational or wrote something motivational transformed, the way they thought about the pandemic or about life and all of that. I think that kind of triggered this in me that yes, if it is something as straightforward or simple as writing something, and publishing it on the internet, if this can have a profound impact and maybe save somebody from, getting into depression or, struggling with mental health issues, or just becoming a better version of themselves in whatever way it can impact them, then I think it can be a really powerful tool. Until the year before last, all these efforts, I was essentially focusing around myself, right? So of course I used to run a personal website in my own name and would share my thoughts, etc. But I thought it's time to institutionalize this. I think the book definitely changed my thinking a bit, and that led to the creation of along with my wife who's leading the effort of fromtheexpertsmouth.com. And now we feel that yeah, it is a platform that we have created, and it is sort of our give back vehicle to the society, where we are creating an ecosystem where people, not just me or my wife or my daughter, but pretty much anybody in the world can come in and share their experiences and help uplift each one of us. And of course it can lead to a process of self discovery for the others as well. So that is just the starting point. I have a lot of other ideas in terms of what we can do to play a more active and direct role. Right now, with a full-time job, of course, all that can is going to be difficult. But I'm thinking of ways in which I can enable that sort of an ecosystem to mushroom, where we are playing a part in developing the right sort of skills of people, creating a community sort of ecosystem where it is not just about getting some information and then going back to life and letting life take over, but to be involved in that community and to kind of live with those principles and to be acting as accountability partners for each other and implementing some of those principles and thought processes. So there's the information or the experience and insight sharing aspect. There is a community aspect. There is a skill development aspect. So if we can bring all of these three things onto our platform, I think it can be a sorry to use the very commonly used word, but it can be a complete game changer, right? Because out of all the tech investments and the tech platforms out there, I do not see any one platform which is kind of focused on bringing these three things together in a constructive sort of way to change lives of people. So you have either people who are focused on, articles and knowledge sharing. There are people who do it in, niche segments, which of course doesn't help the broader society. Or you have them, working on community building, which invariably will, end up becoming a Facebook sort of model where ad revenues and algorithms and of these things will take over, and you will forget, the purpose and, the goodness with which you started all of this,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, I can go on and on, but to cut a long story short, in the interest of time, that's the broad vision. I think of it in terms of, a few C's. So for the first C is the content, and then you have, courses and learning, and then you have community, and, you know, then you have conferences and events. I mean, it can go on and on, but that is the purpose which I would like to see coming to life in the next 10 years or so.
That sounds brilliant. And of course, your starting point is from the expert's mouth, where you've got, people from different walks of life who are sharing their knowledge and expertise in the form of articles. Is that right? Is that going to be also the place where you will create this community and, have events and things like that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So
Yeah.
this will be the umbrella brand, and yeah, we'll do everything within the brand. So it should be exciting, and with with the kind of feedback that I'm getting from people when I'm speaking about some of these concepts, it's extremely positive. And of course, with the rich network that I've built in the last 25 years, I don't think getting together the right sort of people who can deliver this value to people will be a challenge at all. I think it's been a real privilege to work with some great people and to be associated with great people over these last years. And I think the platform will provide an opportunity for these people also to kind of live up to their purpose and fulfill their purpose. Because I think after a couple of decades, pretty much everybody gets into this sort of mode. That's what I get from a lot of my peer group. And of course, I'm sure the feeling will be even more pronounced if I talk about the elder age groups.
And I think you hit such a good point that actually, because there's so much freely available content and knowledge and information, that actually in a way it helps to democratize, expertise, without it becoming transactional and people feeling like, oh, if I'm going to write something, I want to be paid for it, or what's in it for me. That kind of thing has changed. I think people are becoming more willing and happy to share what they know because they realize that it's there's no real value to it unless the person takes it and turns it into something of value for themselves. It doesn't have value in itself. That's certainly my
Right.
experience. So
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not just about expertise. I think it's also about experiences. So, what we are telling people is that you don't need to be a quote unquote expert in the field, known in the industry, to be able to share your insights on the platform. Sometimes even a commoner, and like you have your title for the podcast, interesting lives of ordinary people. I think we all can learn by sharing experiences of ordinary people, right? Because there is some expertise or insight coming from every one of us.
couldn't agree more. And I think that that's the key, that it's insight, not information, because insight is far more valuable than just information. So my final question for you, Rajiv, is what would be your definition of a fulfilled life?
Well, that's a tough one. I still have that feeling that I'm a young teenager. My wife keeps telling me, "Stop behaving and acting like you're a teenager. You're not one anymore." So I don't think that long ahead. But what I feel is, yeah, if I'm able to become a better version of myself every day, every month, every year, then I have done 50% of my job. The other 50% is in terms of having the gratification of seeing some of my experiences or knowledge or expertise, whatever you may want to call it, helping others, and seeing it help others. I think uh, unless I kind of have that visual feedback or auditory feedback of that having impacted somebody's life, I don't feel fulfilled. Right. So those are the two parts to my definition of leading a fulfilled life. And I don't think I that I need to kind of wait until I am, 60 years of age or 70 years of age to fulfill that. I think that is what the pandemic has changed. So earlier I had it in mind that, this is my post-retirement plan. And now I think, why does it need to wait for my retirement? I mean, there are 7 days in a week, 24 hours in a day. So I'm making the best use of each and every day, doing full justice to my day job and to everything else. And the more I do, I think, the more I figure out ways to do more. So
And you are such a great example of why people, sometimes people are so stressed. I'm a CEO, I have a full-time job, so I have no time for anything else. And you are such an example that actually you can do all of these things, and it's the way you do it, and the way you include your family in the things you do. So you kind of have a win-win. You're spending time with your family, but you're also doing things that you're passionate about. But also, I think the thing that you learned as a child, and I'm sure you haven't missed the connection that to get just do enough. And I think a lot of people spend their life trying to be perfect and to be the best. Instead, just do as much as needed rather than trying to be the best, and just put in the amount of effort you need to get that result, and you're happy, or it's good enough. So I think yeah, this has been a fascinating conversation, Rajiv. Thank you so much for your time. I'm already in love with your family, and I want to come and meet them and your children in particular. And what is the book you mentioned that you wrote? Because I will put that in my show notes if people want to check it out. What's it called?
yeah, so it wasn't really a full-fledged book because I just put it up very quickly within 10 days of the lockdown getting announced. So it's a Kindle version. It's a short book. It's called How to Stay Positive and Productive in Your War Against Corona. So yeah, it's more of a lifestyle book about, the things that you could do at home during the lockdown. And that's why it was, time was of the essence, and I needed to ship it out as quickly as possible. So I didn't waste time, making a 200-page book. I said, 40, 50 pages is good enough because this is what people need right now.
Yes, that's such a good idea. So it's on Kindle, and so people can go check it out if they want
Yeah.
to. And
Yes.
in terms of your publication from the expert's mouth, that obviously we can put a link to that as well if people want to go in and check out some of the articles on there. Um, and is there anything else you want to leave our listeners with? Any other pearls of wisdom or experience or advice?
No, I think one of the things which I mentioned earlier, if people can one change their mindset, or at least partially, from being a consumer to being a creator, I think that's a game changer, and their life will not be the same after that. And secondly, I would say, share your experiences, because I mean, people completely underestimate the power of sharing. I think it's the most underrated skill, because if you keep everything with you, you're not going to grow, and people around you are not going to know and benefit out of it either. And we will be surprised, by the kind of things that people around you don't know, because this is what I call the curse of knowledge. And I mean, I've lived that curse of knowledge for many, many years, so I still am living with it. But you tend to believe that because you know something, uh, everybody else in the world does, and it is common sense, right?
Mm,
And this is, even more true of the quote unquote, more educated people who've been through higher education and have the good privileges, etc. It's even more important for such people to overcome that curse of knowledge and share their, experiences, insights, pearls of wisdom, uh, or just simple day-to-day stuff about how they go about living their day, right? It might just be life-changing for others in ways that you cannot even imagine.
yes, yes. That's very, very good advice. Thank you so much, Rajiv. And um, yes, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and we will connect very soon again.
Right? Thank you, Rohini. Thank you.